The moment Elijah Matthews stepped onto Flight 2317 with his first-class ticket, a gift from his father, he never imagined it would end with him being handcuffed in front of hundreds of passengers, bleeding from a gash on his forehead. As security dragged him away, he caught a glimpse of flight attendant Karen Whitmore smirking beside the white businessman now occupying his seat. Elijah's fingers trembled as he pressed his father's contact on his phone. "Dad," he whispered. They don't know who they just messed with. Could one phone call really change the course of systemic racism that had haunted his life? Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from, and if you believe in standing up for justice, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more powerful stories that expose the truth. 15-year-old Elijah Matthews stood at the gates of Westfield Academy, clutching his scholarship certificate as students streamed past in their designer uniforms. As one of only 7 black students at this prestigious institution, Elijah had learned to navigate the subtle microaggressions and outright prejudice with a quiet dignity taught by his father. Marcus Matthews had risen from the projects of East Baltimore to become CEO of Matrix Tech Solutions, a cybersecurity firm valued at over $3 billion. Despite their wealth, Marcus never let Elijah forget their roots or the responsibility that came with privilege. "Excellence is your armor," Marcus often told his son. "In a world that will judge you first by your skin color, you must be so extraordinary they can't ignore your brilliance." Elijah took those words to heart, maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA despite the whispers that he was only there to fill a diversity quota. His teachers praised his work while seeming surprised by his intelligence, a backhanded compliment he'd grown accustomed to. His classmates rarely invited him to their lavish homes or birthday parties at country clubs where his family, despite their wealth, still received suspicious glances. On a crisp Friday afternoon, Elijah rushed home from school to find his father waiting with an unexpected surprise. "Pack your bags," Marcus announced, his wide smile revealing the gap between his front teeth that Elijah had inherited. "You're flying first class to Silicon Valley for the Future Tech Leaders Conference this weekend." Elijah's eyes widened. "By myself?" The conference was legendary, gathering the brightest minds in technology from around the world. "You're 15 now. It's time you represented the Matthews name on your own," Marcus replied, handing him an envelope containing the first-class ticket. "I've arranged everything. The hotel suite is booked, and my assistant will meet you at the airport in San Francisco." That night, while packing his suitcase, Elijah's phone buzzed with messages from his neighborhood friends. Unlike his school acquaintances, these were kids he'd grown up with before moving to the suburbs, kids who understood the unwritten rules of being black in America. "First class? For real?" texted Jamal. "Watch yourself, man. My cousin got bumped 3 times last year and he had the ticket and everything." "They'll probably ask if you're lost," added Deshaun with a laughing emoji that masked a genuine warning. Elijah brushed off their concerns. "It's 2025, he replied, "and anyway, I have a legitimate ticket. They can't just kick me out for being black." His friends responded with eye-rolling emojis. Elijah put down his phone, examining the gold-embossed first-class ticket. Surely with this, he would be treated with the same respect as any other passenger. The morning of the flight, Marcus drove Elijah to the airport 3 hours early. "Remember," his father said, squeezing his shoulder as they parted at the security checkpoint, "always remain calm, but never surrender your dignity. Intelligence beats anger every time." Elijah nodded, hugging his father tightly. "I've got this, Dad." "I know you do, son. You're a Matthews." Marcus straightened his son's collar. "Call me when you land, and remember who you are." With those words echoing in his mind, Elijah waved goodbye and headed toward the security line, excitement bubbling in his chest. He had no idea that the simple act of taking his assigned seat would spiral into one of the most humiliating and consequential moments of his young life. "Random security check, step this way, please." The TSA agent's voice cut through the bustling security area as he gestured Elijah toward a separate screening area. Elijah glanced around, noticing white executives breezing through the metal detectors, without a second glance while he was pulled aside despite having followed all procedures perfectly. "Arms out," the agent commanded, running the wand over Elijah's body with exaggerated slowness. "What's in your bag that might be metallic?" he asked, despite the X-ray already showing nothing suspicious. "Just my laptop and headphones," Elijah answered politely, remembering his father's advice to remain calm. The agent emptied his entire bag anyway, inspecting each item with unnecessary scrutiny, while passengers in the adjacent line moved through efficiently. "These look expensive," another agent commented, holding up Elijah's noise-canceling headphones, a birthday gift from his father. "Receipt for these?" "They were a gift," Elijah explained, growing increasingly uncomfortable as more eyes turned toward him. "Sorry, can't verify they're not stolen. We'll have to confiscate them for further inspection," the agent decided arbitrarily. "But they have my name engraved on them," Elijah protested, pointing to the tiny inscription. "You can file a claim online," the agent dismissed, placing the headphones in a bin and motioning for Elijah to move along, now 30 minutes delayed and missing his most valued possession. Taking deep breaths to steady himself, Elijah approached the boarding area where another obstacle awaited. The gate agent frowned at his first-class ticket, examining it from multiple angles as if searching for signs of forgery. "ID, please," she requested, though she hadn't asked the previous passengers for theirs. She studied his student ID and passport with furrowed brows. "How did you purchase this ticket?" "My father bought it for me," Elijah explained patiently. "I'll need to verify that. Please step aside while I make a call," she insisted, forcing him to wait while other passengers boarded with mere glances at their tickets. 20 minutes and 3 verification calls later, Elijah was finally allowed to board the plane. As he approached the first-class cabin, flight attendant Karen Whitmore's eyes widened in obvious surprise. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun that seemed to pull her features into a permanent look of suspicion. "Economy boarding is later," she said automatically. "I'm in first class," Elijah replied, presenting his ticket for what felt like the dozenth time that day. Karen took the ticket, examining it with the same scrutiny as the gate agent. "Are you sure you're in the right section, young man?" Her emphasis on young man carried unmistakable condescension. "Yes, seat 2A, Elijah confirmed, keeping his voice steady despite the growing knot in his stomach. She checked his ticket against her tablet not once but 3 times, her expression growing increasingly frustrated when she could find no discrepancy to justify her suspicion. Finally, she gestured stiffly toward his seat by the window, watching him as if expecting him to steal something. Have you ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere, even when you have every right to be there? Comment number 1 if you've experienced this kind of prejudice, or number 2 if you've witnessed it happening to someone else. Don't forget to hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their skin color. Would Elijah finally get to enjoy his first-class experience? Or was this just the beginning of a nightmare at 30,000 feet? Subscribe now to find out what happens next in this shocking true story of privilege, prejudice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Once settled in the plush leather seat of 2A, Elijah released a long breath and texted his father. "Made it on board. First class is amazing." He didn't mention the troubling encounters, not wanting to worry his dad unnecessarily. The wide seat enveloped him comfortably as he explored the entertainment system and amenity kit provided. An elderly white woman with silver hair and pearl earrings took the seat beside him, offering a surprised but friendly smile. "First time in first class, dear?" she asked, noticing his exploration of the seat functions. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied, politely. "I'm heading to the Future Tech Leaders Conference in Silicon Valley." "Oh," her eyebrows raised. "You must be quite the bright young man. What area of technology interests you?" As Elijah explained his passion for cybersecurity and recent coding projects, he noticed the subtle shift in the woman's expression from mild condescension to genuine surprise at his articulate speech and advanced knowledge. It was a reaction he knew well from teachers and adults who had underestimated him based on appearance alone. "My grandson is your age, but I don't think he could explain blockchain with such clarity," she commented, the unspoken comparison hanging in the air. The pre-flight service began, with Karen offering champagne and orange juice to first-class passengers. She served the elderly woman promptly, but seemed to continuously overlook Elijah despite his raised hand. After serving everyone else, she finally approached. "Oh, did you want something?" she asked, as if he'd just signaled her. "Orange juice, please," Elijah requested. "We might be out. Let me check," she replied, though he'd clearly seen the full picture on her cart. 20 minutes passed and the drink never arrived. The boarding process continued until a commotion at the front caught Elijah's attention. A white businessman in his 50s with steel gray hair and an expensive suit boarded late, scanning the cabin with an air of entitlement. His gaze fell on Elijah, narrowing slightly before he beckoned Karen over with a subtle gesture. Karen leaned in as the man, who Elijah would later learn was Richard Cunningham, whispered something while repeatedly glancing toward seat 2A. Karen nodded attentively, her expression changing to one of understanding and sudden sweetness as she patted Richard's arm reassuringly. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're waiting for some VIP passengers to complete boarding, and then we'll be on our way." Richard made several phone calls in the aisle, his voice low but authoritative. "Do you know who I am? I always sit in 2A on this route. This is unacceptable. Yes, I expect you to fix it." He ended the call and shot a triumphant look toward Elijah that sent a chill down the teenager's spine. For the next 20 minutes, Elijah noticed Karen and Richard exchanging glances and whispers, occasionally looking his way. The atmosphere of comfort he'd briefly enjoyed was evaporating, replaced by a familiar tension. His instincts warned him something was coming, but surrounded by luxury and the trappings of privilege, he tried to convince himself he was just being paranoid. That illusion shattered when Karen approached with a tablet in hand, her previously forced smile replaced by a business-like expression. "Excuse me, but there seems to be a seating error in our system," she announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'll need you to gather your things and move to another seat." "There must be some mistake," Elijah said calmly, pulling up his ticket confirmation on his phone. "I have a confirmed reservation for seat 2A. Karen's smile tightened. "Our system shows a duplicate booking, and Mr. Cunningham here is a diamond. Elite member who always sits in 2A on this route. We need to accommodate our frequent flyers." "But I checked in hours ago and was assigned this seat," Elijah pointed out reasonably. "If there was a duplicate booking, shouldn't the later check-in be reassigned?" Karen's pleasant facade began to crack. "Young man, you need to comply with crew instructions. It's a federal regulation." Richard Cunningham stepped closer, looming over Elijah's seat. "Look, boy, I've sat in 2A every week for 5 years. There's obviously been a mistake with your ticket." His emphasis on boy wasn't subtle, nor was the challenging look in his eyes. Elijah felt his heart rate increasing but kept his voice steady. "Sir, I understand you prefer this seat, but my ticket confirms this assignment. Perhaps the airline can offer you an equivalent seat nearby?" "This is ridiculous," Richard exclaimed, looking around for support from other passengers. "I'm not going to argue with a child about my regular seat." The elderly woman beside Elijah, who had been friendly earlier, suddenly became engrossed in her magazine, avoiding eye contact entirely. No one in the first-class cabin spoke up, though many watched the unfolding scene with uncomfortable expressions. 2 more flight attendants appeared, forming a semicircle around Elijah's seat in a clear intimidation tactic. One of them, whose name tag read Michael Stevens, spoke with the authority of a superior officer. "We need to resolve this seating issue immediately, or we'll be delayed further," he stated firmly. "Sir, please gather your belongings and follow me to your new seat." "May I see the supposed error in your system?" Elijah requested, his father's advice echoing in his mind. "Always demand evidence. Never accept unjustified authority." Michael exchanged glances with Karen, irritation flashing across both their faces. "That's confidential airline information. You need to follow crew instructions immediately." Sensing the situation escalating, Elijah decided to call his father. As he pulled out his phone, Karen lunged forward. "Phones must be in airplane mode now," she snapped, attempting to grab the device from his hand. "The door isn't closed yet and we're not moving," Elijah countered, pulling his phone away from her reach. "I'm allowed to make a call." As Elijah dialed, Karen signaled to Michael, who pressed the call button repeatedly. Within moments, 2 air marshals emerged from the back of the plane. Karen immediately pointed to Elijah. "This passenger is becoming disruptive and refusing crew instructions," she claimed, her voice carrying throughout the now silent cabin. "I'm simply trying to resolve a ticket discrepancy," Elijah explained to the marshals, showing them his phone, with the confirmation details, "and I was attempting to contact my father for assistance." The marshals, both white men with crew cuts and stern expressions, barely glanced at his evidence. "Stand up, sir," one ordered gruffly. "Please, just verify my ticket," Elijah insisted, growing more desperate as he saw Richard Cunningham smirking in the aisle. Without further discussion, one marshal grabbed Elijah's arm while the other reached for his other side. The sudden movement caused Elijah to flinch, which they interpreted as resistance. "Stop resisting," shouted one, though Elijah had done nothing of the sort. In the chaotic moments that followed, Elijah found himself being physically pulled from his seat. As they yanked him into the aisle, his head struck an armrest with enough force to split the skin above his eye. Warm blood trickled down his face as passengers gasped, and several raised phones to record the incident. Richard Cunningham wasted no time sliding into the vacated seat 2A, arranging himself comfortably as if nothing unusual had happened, avoiding looking at the blood drops now, staining the plush carpet. With his arms painfully restrained behind him, Elijah was marched through the entire length of the plane, past hundreds of staring passengers, some recording, others averting their eyes from the disturbing scene of a bleeding black teenager in handcuffs. The humiliation burned hotter than the wound on his forehead, but Elijah held his head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. The air marshals gripped Elijah's arm so tightly they left bruise marks as they dragged him through the jetway and into a sterile security office. Despite his complete compliance, one marshal kept repeating, "Stop resisting," creating a false narrative for the airport security cameras. When Elijah tried to explain that he wasn't resisting, the marshal yanked his arm harder, causing him to wince in pain. Blood continued trickling from the gash on his forehead, running down his face, and staining his white button-up shirt. "I need medical attention," Elijah stated calmly, blood dripping onto the gray linoleum floor. "And I'd like to call my father." "You'll get medical attention when we determine you're not a threat," replied the burlier of the 2 marshals, a man with a crew cut and neck tattoo partially visible above his collar. "Phones stay with us until questioning is complete." They led him into a windowless room with a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 uncomfortable chairs. A security camera blinked in the corner, its red light the only splash of color in the otherwise gray space. The handcuffs bit into Elijah's wrists as they forced him into a chair, still refusing to loosen them despite his obvious pain. 2 airport security officers joined them, looking at Elijah with immediate suspicion. "What's the situation?" asked the older one, completely ignoring Elijah as if he weren't present. Passenger became aggressive when asked to comply with crew instructions, the marshal replied. "Possible fraudulent ticket use attempting to access first class without proper documentation." "That's not true," Elijah interjected. "I had a confirmed first-class ticket purchased by my father. The flight attendants were trying to move me to give my seat to another passenger." The security officer finally looked at him, eyes narrowing. "Let me see your ID." When Elijah explained that the marshals had taken his phone and wallet, the officer turned to the marshals who produced the items. They examined his student ID with skepticism. "Westfield Academy? That's that fancy private school," one commented. "How does someone like you attend there?" "I'm on an academic scholarship," Elijah answered, though he knew that wasn't relevant to the current situation. "Right," the officer replied sarcastically. "And I suppose you just happened to find a first-class ticket too?" The younger security officer snickered. Maybe he thought he could sneak in. They always trying to get something for nothing. The racial undertone wasn't subtle, and Elijah felt a cold anger building beneath his calm exterior. "My father purchased the ticket legally. You can verify that with the airline. Marcus Matthews of Matrix Tech Solutions." This claim was met with eye rolls until one of the airport police officers who had just entered the room looked up from his notebook. "Wait, Matrix Tech? The cybersecurity company?" "Yes," Elijah confirmed. My father is the CEO and founder. The disbelief on their faces might have been comical in another context. The blood continued dripping from Elijah's forehead wound, forming a small puddle on the metal table, but still no one moved to provide medical assistance. I need to call my father now, Elijah insisted, his voice steady despite the throbbing pain. And I need medical attention. You'll get a phone call when we're done with questioning, the police officer replied, though his tone had shifted slightly. First, explain why you refused to follow crew instructions. For the next 20 minutes, Elijah repeated his story, while the officers interrupted, twisted his words, and attempted to confuse him. Finally, seeing his unwavering composure, one of the officers reluctantly slid his phone across the table. One call. Make it quick. With hands still cuffed, Elijah awkwardly dialed his father's number. When Marcus answered, Elijah's carefully maintained composure nearly cracked at the sound of his father's voice. Dad, I'm in trouble at the airport. They dragged me off the plane because they wanted to give my seat to a white businessman. I'm being held by security, I'm handcuffed, and I'm bleeding. He could hear his father's sharp intake of breath, then the deadly calm that Marcus only adopted in the most serious situations. Put one of the officers on the phone, now. Elijah held out the phone. My father wants to speak with whoever's in charge. The senior police officer took the phone with a dismissive expression that quickly transformed as Marcus spoke. The officer's face paled, and he straightened his posture, though Marcus couldn't see him. Sir, I understand your concern, but your son was reported as disruptive on the aircraft. He paused, listening. Yes, sir. I realize that's your position, but we have procedures. Another pause. Matrix Tech Solutions? You're that Marcus Matthews? His eyes darted to Elijah with newfound recognition. Of course, sir, but the situation required. He swallowed hard. Yes, sir. I understand. We'll review the security footage immediately. Have you ever witnessed someone's attitude completely change once they realized who they were really dealing with? Comment number 1. If you've seen prejudice magically disappear when money or power enters the conversation. Drop a like if you believe no one should need wealth or status to be treated with basic dignity and respect. Do you think Marcus Matthews will let this injustice slide, or is he about to turn this airline's world upside down? Subscribe now to see what happens when the wrong person's son gets racially profiled. The atmosphere in the security office transformed dramatically after the phone call with Marcus Matthews. The handcuffs were quickly removed from Elijah's wrists, revealing angry red marks where they had cut into his skin. A first aid kit appeared, and the younger officer awkwardly attempted to clean the wound on Elijah's forehead. Sorry about the misunderstanding, the senior police officer said, not sounding particularly sorry. We were just following standard protocol. Elijah remained silent, rubbing his wrists and watching as the initially hostile security team scrambled to cover themselves. His father had clearly made an impression, and now phones were ringing throughout the security office. Within 15 minutes, the airport director himself arrived, a tall man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as James Wilson. Mr. Matthews, please accept our deepest apologies for this unfortunate incident. If you'll come with me, we have a private suite where you can wait in comfort while we sort this out. I'd like the security footage preserved, Elijah stated, remembering his father's instructions from the phone call. All of it, from the gate, the aircraft, and this room. Wilson's smile tightened slightly. Of course, though, I'm sure when we review it, we'll find this was just a series of misunderstandings. Including the part where the flight attendant lied about my ticket and the marshals caused this? Elijah asked, pointing to his forehead where a butterfly bandage now covered the wound. Before Wilson could respond, his phone buzzed. Glancing at it, his eyes widened slightly. Your father's legal team has already contacted our office. They're requesting all relevant footage be preserved immediately. He forced another smile, which we were planning to do anyway, of course. As they walked through the terminal toward the airport's VIP lounge, Elijah noticed people pointing at him and holding up phones. The incident had already begun spreading on social media. In the luxury lounge, a medical professional properly cleaned and dressed Elijah's wound, while 2 airline representatives hovered nearby looking increasingly anxious. Their nameplates identified them as Veronica Jackson, Customer Service Director, and Thomas Reed, Legal Counsel. Mr. Matthews, on behalf of Transcontinental Airlines, we want to express our sincere regret for your experience today, Veronica began, her scripted apology falling flat. We'd like to offer you upgraded travel on any of our routes for the next year, as well as compensation for any inconvenience. Where are the flight attendants who were involved? Elijah asked, ignoring the offer. Thomas cleared his throat. The flight has departed. They're continuing to their destination as scheduled. And the passenger who took my seat? An uncomfortable pause followed. Mr. Cunningham chose to deplane before takeoff, Thomas admitted. He had an urgent business matter to attend to. Elijah nodded, understanding the reality. Richard had gotten what he wanted by having Elijah removed, then left to avoid any consequences, while the flight crew continued as if nothing had happened. His phone buzzed with notifications as Torture Justice for Elijah began trending, alongside video clips of him being dragged through the plane. His classmates at Westfield Academy were texting expressions of shock and support, many seeing for the first time the reality of what their black peer experienced. The airport director's phone rang again. After a brief conversation, he turned to Elijah with a noticeably paler complexion. Your father has chartered a private jet. He'll be landing in our executive terminal in approximately 2 hours. He's requested that all involved staff be available for a meeting upon his arrival. Veronica and Thomas exchanged alarmed glances. The flight crew is currently in the air, Thomas reiterated. Then I suggest you have them meet with Mr. Matthews upon their return, Wilson replied, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation now that he knew exactly who Marcus Matthews was. He's also bringing the company's chief legal counsel with him. Veronica's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Perhaps we can discuss a more substantial settlement package before they arrive? We value customer satisfaction above all else. Elijah thought about how differently he'd been treated just hours earlier, when he was just a black teenager with a first-class ticket. Now that his father's name and company were involved, everyone was scrambling to make amends. The same security, officers who had ignored his bleeding forehead were now offering him premium refreshments and apologizing for the misunderstanding. I'll wait for my father, Elijah replied calmly, checking his phone as hashtags boycott, transcontinental, and flying while black gained momentum. The airline stock had already dropped 3% in the hours since the videos began circulating. As the representatives retreated to make frantic phone calls, Elijah received a text from his father. I'm on my way. Don't sign anything. Don't accept anything. Justice is coming. The Transcontinental Airlines executives grew increasingly nervous as the social media firestorm intensified. Their damage control team was working overtime, but the video of Elijah bleeding in handcuffs had been viewed millions of times across multiple platforms. Inside the private VIP lounge, the atmosphere was tense as Veronica Jackson returned with a more senior executive, Bradley Thompson, the airline's vice president of customer experience. Mr. Matthews, Bradley began, adjusting his silk tie. I've just flown in from headquarters to address this personally. What happened today falls far below our company standards. Elijah listened as Bradley offered a seemingly heartfelt apology, followed by an increasingly generous compensation package. Lifetime first-class upgrades, hundreds of thousands of miles, priority boarding status, and a substantial cash settlement. A medical specialist had been called in to properly document and treat Elijah's injuries, photographing the wound on his forehead and the bruises on his wrists for what they called internal review purposes. We want to make this right, Bradley insisted, sliding a document across the table. This offer is considerably more generous than our standard resolution packages. The airport director, still hovering nearby, added, We're already reviewing our security protocols, and the officers involved will undergo additional training. The words were right, but Elijah sensed the hollowness behind them. This wasn't about justice. It was about silencing a problem before it grew larger. The settlement offer included a strict non-disclosure agreement that would prevent Elijah or his family from discussing the incident publicly. I appreciate the offer, Elijah said diplomatically, but I'll wait for my father before making any decisions. Bradley's smile tightened. Of course, just know that our offer is time-sensitive. Once lawyers get involved, these things tend to become more complicated. On the sleek television mounted in the lounge, a breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. Transcontinental Airlines under fire after black teen forcibly removed from first-class seat. The airline's stock had now dropped by 7%, representing millions in lost value. Elijah's phone continued buzzing with messages of support. His Westfield Academy classmates, who had often kept him at arm's length, were now publicly declaring their outrage on his behalf. Several had shared stories of their own, witnessing how differently Elijah was treated by security guards at school events or by staff at restaurants when they went out as a group. The incident had opened many eyes to realities they had previously ignored. Meanwhile, at 30,000 feet, Flight 2317 continued to its destination. Karen Whitmore served drinks to first-class passengers as if nothing unusual had happened, though passengers continued giving her wary looks. In Seat 2A, a middle-aged woman who had been reassigned after Richard Cunningham deplaned kept glancing at the bloodstain on the carpet that the cleaning crew hadn't completely removed. As the flight began its descent, Karen received a message from the captain. Management waiting upon arrival. Incident with passenger Matthews escalating. All crew to remain on aircraft after landing. The news spread quickly among the flight attendants, and Michael Stevens pulled Karen aside in the galley. What exactly happened with that kid? The truth, Karen. He was uncooperative and aggressive, she insisted. I was just following protocol for problematic passengers. Michael looked skeptical. Multiple passengers are saying he was calm and polite, and now his father's involved? I heard he's some tech billionaire. He's just playing the race card, Karen whispered harshly. You know how they are. Always looking for a handout or special treatment. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement that sent chills through the crew. The CEO of Transcontinental Airlines himself would be meeting them upon landing. Back at the departure airport, Marcus Matthews arrived with the precision and force of a calculated missile strike. He stepped off his private jet accompanied by Ayanna Washington, Matrix Tech's chief legal counsel, and two assistants carrying multiple tablets and document cases. Despite the stressful circumstances, Marcus maintained the composed demeanor that had made him legendary in business circles, though the tension in his jaw revealed his carefully controlled anger. When he saw Elijah, he briefly broke character, embracing his son with fierce protectiveness before examining the wound on his forehead. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes before he restored his professional facade. I've reviewed the videos, he said to the assembled airline representatives. Now I want to speak directly with the CEO, not intermediaries. Bradley Thompson cleared his throat. Mr. Jackson is currently overseas, but he's given me full authority to resolve this matter, to your satisfaction. Then Mr. Jackson will be returning early, Marcus replied with deadly calm. Because until I speak with him directly, this company will continue bleeding market value by the minute. Your stock has dropped 12% since market open. How much more can you afford to lose? As if to underscore his point, Marcus's phone chimed. He glanced at it briefly. The Congressional Black Caucus is requesting information about the incident. The Department of Transportation is opening a preliminary inquiry. How long before the FAA gets involved, do you think? Visibly shaken, Bradley excused himself to make urgent calls. The settlement offer that had seemed so generous an hour ago now felt insultingly inadequate, given the scale of the crisis unfolding. Elijah watched his father work with a mixture of awe and relief. The men who had dismissed him, the system that had humiliated him, were now scrambling to respond to Marcus's calculated pressure. For a moment, it seemed like justice might actually be possible, that the wrong done to him would be meaningfully addressed. But neither father nor son realized that behind the scenes, Richard Cunningham had already begun orchestrating a counter-offensive that would turn this incident from a corporate embarrassment into all-out war. Marcus Matthews transformed the presidential suite at the Grand Meridian Hotel into a war room within hours. Multiple screens displayed social media trends, news coverage, and stock tickers, while a team of legal experts, PR specialists, and digital forensics analysts worked with focused intensity. Elijah sat at a side table, still processing the day's events while finishing a school assignment due the next day. demonstrating the resilience his father had instilled in him. "They're escalating beyond standard damage control," noted Ayanna, Washington, swiping through a series of newly published articles. "This level of coordination suggests Richard Cunningham is leveraging significant connections across multiple industries," Marcus nodded grimly. "He's using the old playbook. When confronted with irrefutable evidence of racism, attack the victim's character and credibility." The smear campaign had expanded with alarming speed. Anonymous sources claimed Elijah had been on academic probation at Westfield Academy, false. That Matrix Tech had been under federal investigation for contract irregularities, also false. And that Marcus Matthews had a history of filing frivolous discrimination lawsuits for financial gain, entirely fabricated, as this was the first time he had ever considered legal action. "We've identified bot networks amplifying these narratives," reported Zoe Chen, Matrix Tech's head of cybersecurity. "The pattern matches known disinformation tactics." Marcus's phone rang with a call from Dean Richardson at Westfield Academy. "Marcus, I need to discuss the situation with Elijah," the dean began, his usual confident tone replaced with uncomfortable hesitation. "Several board members are concerned about the negative attention this incident is bringing to the school." "Negative attention?" Marcus repeated incredulously. "My son was physically assaulted because of racial profiling, and the school's concern is its reputation." "Of course we're concerned about Elijah," the dean backpedaled quickly. "But perhaps it would be better for everyone if this situation were resolved quietly. Some parents are suggesting that continuing to pursue this matter so publicly might create an uncomfortable environment for Elijah upon his return." Marcus understood the subtext immediately. Wealthy white parents were pressuring the school to pressure him to drop the matter. "Dean Richardson, let me be clear. My son will return to Westfield with his head held high, and the school will ensure he faces no retaliation for standing up against discrimination. Unless you'd prefer I withdraw my annual 7-figure donation to the scholarship fund and explain exactly why to the media." The dean quickly assured him of the school's full support. Meanwhile, Elijah was receiving messages from classmates he barely knew, suddenly expressing solidarity after years of exclusion. Some seemed genuine, while others clearly sought to associate themselves with a trending story. More meaningful were the texts from his neighborhood friends who had warned him about flying, while Black, offering support without seeking anything in return. In a private moment, Elijah asked his father a question that had been troubling him. "Dad, would any of this be happening if you weren't Marcus Matthews? What about all the Black people who don't have a famous parent or the resources to fight back?" Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's exactly why we can't back down. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about changing a system that thinks discrimination is acceptable as long as it's directed at people without power." The next morning brought a new challenge. Elijah's phone was flooded with anonymous threats, some merely insulting but others explicitly violent. Simultaneously, Marcus received an email containing his son's personal information, including their home address and Elijah's school schedule, a clear intimidation tactic. "We need to increase security," Marcus decided immediately, arranging for protection at their home and for Elijah upon his return to school. The turning point came unexpectedly through one of Matrix Tech's junior analysts, who discovered a crucial piece of evidence. During a routine search of publicly available communications, she found text messages Richard Cunningham had sent to airline staff that had been inadvertently backed up to his cloud account due to improper security settings. The messages were damning. "Get that boy out of my seat. I don't care what you have to do." And later, to a senior airline executive, "Why was a kid like that in first class anyway? Don't you people screen passengers anymore?" Armed with this evidence, Marcus decided to shift from defense to offense. Rather than simply responding to the airline's inadequate offers, he would expose the entire system that enabled such discrimination. His tech team developed a secure reporting platform where airline employees and passengers could anonymously share similar experiences of discrimination. Within 24 hours, hundreds of stories poured in, revealing a pattern of systematic profiling across the industry. The hashtag Flying While Black evolved from a trending topic to a movement as people shared experiences of being downgraded, subjected to random searches, or removed from flights without cause. As public pressure mounted, an anonymous airline employee leaked an internal memo distributed to gate agents and flight attendants months earlier, instructing them to provide additional verification for passengers who don't match the typical profile of premium cabin customers. Though coded in corporate language, the directive clearly encouraged racial profiling. Marcus Matthews transformed the presidential suite at the Grand Meridian Hotel into a war room within hours. Multiple screens displayed social media trends, news coverage, and stock tickers, while a team of legal experts, PR specialists, and digital forensics analysts worked with focused intensity. Elijah sat at a side table, still processing the day's events while finishing a school assignment due the next day, demonstrating the resilience his father had instilled in him. "They're escalating beyond standard damage control," noted Ayanna, Washington, swiping through a series of newly published articles. This level of coordination suggests Richard Cunningham is leveraging significant connections across multiple industries. Marcus nodded grimly. He's using the old playbook. When confronted with irrefutable evidence of racism, attack the victim's character and credibility. The smear campaign had expanded with alarming speed. Anonymous sources claimed Elijah had been on academic probation at Westfield Academy, false. That Matrix Tech had been under federal investigation for contract irregularities, also false. And that Marcus Matthews had a history of filing frivolous discrimination lawsuits for financial gain, entirely fabricated, as this was the first time he had ever considered legal action. "We've identified bot networks amplifying these narratives," reported Zoe Chen, Matrix Tech's head of cybersecurity. "The pattern matches known disinformation tactics." Marcus's phone rang with a call from Dean Richardson at Westfield Academy. "Marcus, I need to discuss the situation with Elijah," the dean began, his usual confident tone replaced with uncomfortable hesitation. "Several board members are concerned about the negative attention this incident is bringing to the school." "Negative attention?" Marcus repeated incredulously. "My son was physically assaulted because of racial profiling, and the school's concern is its reputation." "Of course we're concerned about Elijah," the dean backpedaled quickly. "But perhaps it would be better for everyone if this situation were resolved quietly. Some parents are suggesting that continuing to pursue this matter so publicly might create an uncomfortable environment for Elijah upon his return." Marcus understood the subtext immediately. Wealthy white parents were pressuring the school to pressure him to drop the matter. "Dean Richardson, let me be clear. My son will return to Westfield with his head held high, and the school will ensure he faces no retaliation for standing up against discrimination. Unless you'd prefer I withdraw my annual 7-figure donation to the scholarship fund and explain exactly why to the media." The dean quickly assured him of the school's full support. Meanwhile, Elijah was receiving messages from classmates he barely knew, suddenly expressing solidarity after years of exclusion. Some seemed genuine, while others clearly sought to associate themselves with a trending story. More meaningful were the texts from his neighborhood friends who had warned him about flying, while Black, offering support without seeking anything in return. In a private moment, Elijah asked his father a question that had been troubling him. "Dad, would any of this be happening if you weren't Marcus Matthews? What about all the Black people who don't have a famous parent or the resources to fight back?" Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's exactly why we can't back down. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about changing a system that thinks discrimination is acceptable as long as it's directed at people without power." The next morning brought a new challenge. Elijah's phone was flooded with anonymous threats, some merely insulting, but others explicitly violent. Simultaneously, Marcus received an email containing his son's personal information, including their home address and Elijah's school schedule, a clear intimidation tactic. "We need to increase security," Marcus decided immediately, arranging for protection at their home and for Elijah upon his return to school. The turning point came unexpectedly through one of Matrix Tech's junior analysts, who discovered a crucial piece of evidence. During a routine search of publicly available communications, She found text messages Richard Cunningham had sent to airline staff that had been inadvertently backed up to his cloud account due to improper security settings. The messages were damning. "Get that boy out of my seat. I don't care what you have to do." And later, to a senior airline executive, "Why was a kid like that in first class anyway? Don't you people screen passengers anymore?" Armed with this evidence, Marcus decided to shift from defense to offense. Rather than simply responding to the airline's inadequate offers, he would expose the entire system that enabled such discrimination. His tech team developed a secure reporting platform where airline employees and passengers could anonymously share similar experiences of discrimination. Within 24 hours, hundreds of stories poured in, revealing a pattern of systematic profiling across the industry. The hashtag #ThatShari evolved from a trending topic to a movement as people shared experiences of being downgraded, subjected to random searches, or removed from flights without cause. As public pressure mounted, an anonymous airline employee leaked an internal memo distributed to gate agents and flight attendants months earlier, instructing them to provide additional verification for passengers who don't match the typical profile of premium cabin customers. Though coded in corporate language, the directive clearly encouraged racial profiling. The story exploded across national media when Elijah appeared on Morning America with his father. Unlike many youth thrust into the spotlight, Elijah spoke with remarkable poise about his experience, neither downplaying the trauma nor allowing himself to be portrayed solely as a victim. "What happened to me happens to people who look like me every day," he explained to the visibly moved host. "The only difference is that most don't have the resources to fight back." The interview humanized Elijah in a way that made the smear campaign against him appear even more despicable. Viewership numbers broke records as America confronted the reality of racial profiling through the experience of an articulate teenager who could have been anyone's son, student, or friend. Following the broadcast, Elijah's classmates at Westfield Academy began approaching him differently. Students who had previously ignored him suddenly wanted to share their own observations of differential treatment. "I never noticed before, but security always asked to check your bag at school events and I've never once been stopped," admitted Trevor Williams, a classmate who had rarely spoken to Elijah before. Several students formed an equality initiative club with Elijah reluctantly agreeing to serve as honorary president. While appreciating the support, he confided to his father that some of it felt performative, more about the students' desire to associate with a cause célèbre than genuine commitment to change. Meanwhile, passengers from Flight 2317 began contacting Marcus's legal team with additional video evidence. A businessman from Row 5 had captured clear footage of Richard Cunningham instructing Karen about removing Elijah. A college student in economy had recorded the entire removal sequence, including Karen's smirk as Elijah was dragged away bleeding. As these videos circulated, Transcontinental Airlines stock plummeted further. Harold Jackson called Marcus directly, practically begging for a resolution. "Name your price, Marcus. We need to put this behind us." "This isn't about money," Marcus replied. "It's about accountability and systemic change." Behind the scenes, Richard Cunningham was growing desperate. His initial assumption that his wealth and connections would easily overcome one entitled black kid had proven catastrophically wrong. His own reputation was suffering as his role in the incident became more widely known. He attempted to contact several witnesses, offering significant financial incentives to change their statements or clarify what they had seen. One recipient of these offers was Jordan Miller, a flight attendant trainee who had been observing on Flight 2317. Jordan recorded the conversation and provided it to Matthews's legal team, further bolstering their case. The situation escalated to a national level when Senator Ayanna Thompson, chair of the Transportation Committee, announced congressional hearings on discriminatory practices in the airline industry. What happened to Elijah Matthews appears to be not an isolated incident, but part of a troubling pattern that requires federal scrutiny, she stated in a press release. Airlines nationwide began reviewing their policies and conducting urgent diversity training, afraid of becoming the next target of public outrage. Meanwhile, Karen Whitmore decided to go on the offensive, appearing on a conservative talk show to present herself as the victim of cancel culture. "I was just doing my job," she insisted tearfully to the sympathetic host. Now my entire career is being destroyed because people are so quick to cry racism. Her performance might have been compelling had Marcus's team not released the newly discovered text messages between her and Richard the same day, revealing her eagerness to remove Elijah and her dismissive comments about these people always trying to get special treatment. The FBI became involved after several of the threats against Elijah crossed state lines, elevating them to potential federal hate crimes. Agents interviewed the Matthews family, taking the threats seriously in a way local police had not. This additional layer of official involvement further legitimized Elijah's experience in the public consciousness. Through it all, Elijah maintained his academic excellence, completing assignments remotely and even preparing for an upcoming science competition. "They wanted to make me feel small," he told his father one evening. "The best revenge is to keep being exceptional." Marcus squeezed his son's shoulder, overwhelmed with pride at Elijah's resilience and wisdom beyond his 15 years. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, he knew that regardless of the outcome, his son had already won the most important victory by refusing to be diminished by others' prejudice. Richard Cunningham had not built his fortune by accepting defeat easily. As his public strategy faltered, he shifted to attacking Matrix Tech Solutions directly, leveraging his extensive business connections to pressure Marcus where it might hurt most, his company's bottom line. Within days, 3 of Matrix Tech's largest corporate clients announced they were reviewing their vendor relationships, citing vague concerns about alignment with corporate values. A major government contract that had been all but finalized was suddenly delayed for additional assessment. The message was clear: drop the airline incident or watch your company suffer. Marcus called an emergency meeting with his executive team, many of whom looked nervous as they reviewed the potential financial impact. "Richard Cunningham is calling in favors across multiple industries," explained CFO David Kelly. "If all these clients walk, we're looking at a 30% revenue reduction within 6 months. So we're supposed to let racial discrimination slide because it might affect our profits?" Marcus challenged, looking around the table. Most executives averted their eyes, until Ayanna Washington spoke up. "I joined this company because you promised it would be different from others I'd worked for, that principles wouldn't be sacrificed for profit. Was that true, or just good marketing?" Her words hung in the air as Marcus considered their situation. After a long moment, he stood up. "Prepare contingency plans for the worst-case financial scenario. But we're not backing down. If clients want to leave because we stood against discrimination, they weren't aligned with our values to begin with." Meanwhile, Transcontinental Airlines made one final attempt at damage control, offering a settlement package that included a $10 million payment to the Matthews family, a commitment to sensitivity training for all staff, and a diversity initiative, to be named after Elijah, all contingent upon signing an extensive non-disclosure agreement that would prevent them from discussing the incident or the airline's practices publicly. When Marcus rejected this offer, Harold Jackson was apoplectic. "This is 5 times our largest previous settlement. What more do you want?" "Justice doesn't come with a gag order," Marcus replied simply. As corporate pressure intensified, Marcus's team made a breakthrough discovery. Using Matrix Tech's advanced facial recognition software, they analyzed years of airport security footage and first-class check-in procedures, creating a statistical model that proved conclusively that Black passengers were subjected to additional verification measures at a rate 17 times higher than white passengers. This data science approach shifted the conversation from one isolated incident to demonstrable systemic discrimination, making it significantly harder for the airline industry to dismiss as anecdotal or coincidental. The Flight Attendants Union, which had initially stood behind Karen Whitmore out of professional solidarity, began distancing themselves after internal investigations revealed her history of similar incidents with passengers of color, all of which had been addressed with merely nominal coaching. Several union representatives approached Marcus privately, sharing their frustration with how complaints about discriminatory behavior were routinely suppressed. "Karen isn't an anomaly," one veteran flight attendant confided. "She's the product of a system that rewards treating certain passengers differently while pretending we don't." Richard Cunningham, growing increasingly isolated as associates sought to avoid the controversy, made a fatal miscalculation. He attempted to hack into Matrix Tech's servers, hoping to find damaging information on Marcus or evidence that the company's security products weren't as robust as advertised. The attempt was not only detected immediately, but traced directly back to a cybersecurity firm hired by Cunningham's company. For a man whose business reputation hinged on being above reproach, this corporate espionage was potentially ruinous. Marcus now had leverage that extended beyond the original incident. Rather than immediately exposing the hacking attempt, he allowed the information to reach key Transcontinental Airlines board members through back channels, along with evidence of how Richard's behavior had tanked their stock value and damaged the brand. The resulting panic led to an emergency board meeting called without Harold Jackson's knowledge. The airline's largest shareholders, watching their investments plummet, demanded immediate action to stop the bleeding. By the time Jackson learned of the meeting, a majority had already voted to distance the company from Richard Cunningham and completely revise their approach to the Matthews situation. The Transcontinental Airlines boardroom had never seen such tension. On one side sat Harold Jackson with his executive team, faces grim as they confronted the reality of their situation. On the other, Marcus Matthews and Ayanna Washington displayed the calm confidence of those holding an unbeatable hand. Richard Cunningham had been invited but positioned separately from both parties, his former allies now treating him as a liability rather than an asset. "Before we begin," Marcus stated, opening his laptop, "I want to be clear about what we're addressing today. This isn't about one seat on one flight, or even about my son specifically. It's about a systemic problem that your airline has not only tolerated, but institutionalized." He presented a comprehensive analysis of the airline's practices, including the recently discovered facial recognition data, internal communications documenting discriminatory policies disguised as customer experience optimization, and testimony from employees about the unwritten rules of passenger treatment based on appearance. Richard attempted to interject with claims about security concerns and customer preferences, but the board chairman silenced him with an icy stare. "You've done enough damage, Richard. The floor belongs to Mr. Matthews." As Marcus concluded his presentation, he made an unexpected pivot. Despite having grounds for a lawsuit that would likely result in hundreds of millions in damages, "That's not my objective. I'm proposing a different approach to resolution." The executives leaned forward, wary but intrigued. "First, Transcontinental Airlines will publicly acknowledge the discriminatory treatment of my son and others. No mealy-mouthed regret for any misunderstanding, but full accountability." Harold Jackson winced but nodded. "Second, Karen Whitmore, Michael Stevens, and the entire crew of Flight 2317 will be terminated for cause, with the specific violations documented in their employment records." "The union will fight this," Jackson protested weakly. "The union has already signaled they won't defend demonstrated discrimination," Ayanna countered, sliding across documentation of their recent position shift. "Third," Marcus continued, "Richard, Cunningham will be banned from your airline for life and his Founders Club membership revoked. His board position with your parent company will be terminated." Richard jumped to his feet. "This is outrageous. I've been flying Transcontinental for 30 years and invested millions in this company. And in return, you believe that gave you the right to have a black child removed from his rightful seat?" Marcus replied evenly. "Actions have consequences, Mr. Cunningham. Be grateful we're not pursuing criminal charges for the hacking attempt against my company." The color drained from Richard's face as board members turned to him with shocked expressions. He had clearly not informed them of this latest misstep. "Finally," Marcus said, "Transcontinental will implement comprehensive anti-discrimination reforms across all aspects of your operation, from booking algorithms to staff training to complaint resolution. My team has prepared a detailed framework, and implementation will be verified by an independent third party." Rather than the expected protests about costs and practicality, the board chair asked, "And if we agree to these terms, then instead of being destroyed by this incident, your airline can lead the industry in addressing a problem that affects all carriers. You can transform a potential bankruptcy into a competitive advantage by being the first to get this right." The strategic brilliance of the offer wasn't lost on the business leaders present. Marcus wasn't just seeking punishment, he was offering them a path to rehabilitation that could ultimately benefit their bottom line. After brief private consultations, the board unanimously approved the proposal, with Richard Cunningham abstaining in bitter defeat before storming out. Within hours, Karen, Michael, and the entire flight crew received termination notices, and Richard's executive access badges were deactivated. The airline issued a public statement acknowledging the inexcusable discriminatory treatment of Elijah Matthews and announcing a comprehensive overhaul of policies and training. The Matthews Standards for Equitable Treatment became the framework, not only for transcontinental, but eventually for the entire industry as other airlines scrambled to adopt similar measures, rather than risk becoming the next target of public outrage. Elijah returned to Westfield Academy not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. The Equality Initiative Club he reluctantly led grew into one of the school's most active organizations, creating a student-led review of institutional practices that uncovered and addressed numerous inequities in disciplinary approaches, academic opportunities, and social inclusion. 6 months later, Elijah stood before a new class of flight attendant trainees at Transcontinental's Training Academy, sharing his experience not to shame but to educate. The system failed that day, he told them, but systems are made of people, and people can choose differently. In the audience, Marcus watched his son with quiet pride. The incident that could have diminished Elijah had instead revealed his extraordinary character and resilience. More importantly, it had created tangible change in an industry long resistant to addressing its discriminatory practices. As father and son boarded a first-class flight together weeks later, the crew greeted Elijah by name, with genuine respect rather than the suspicious scrutiny he had faced before. Several passengers recognized him, offering subtle nods of acknowledgement. "Was it worth it?" Marcus asked as they settled into their seats. Elijah considered the question, thinking about all they had endured and accomplished. "It wasn't about being worth it for me," he finally answered. "It was about making sure the next kid doesn't have to go through the same thing." As the plane took off, Elijah looked out the window at the receding ground below, understanding that some battles are fought not for immediate victory, but for the future they make possible. In standing up for his own dignity, he had helped create a world where others might not have to fight so hard for theirs. The story of Elijah Matthews teaches us several powerful lessons about confronting racism in modern America. First, it reveals how discrimination often hides behind policies and procedures that are selectively enforced. Second, it demonstrates how institutions initially protect themselves rather than addressing injustice, offering settlements and silence instead of meaningful change. Most importantly, the story highlights the tragic reality that justice often depends on privilege and power. Had Elijah not been the son of a wealthy tech CEO with resources to fight back, his experience might have become just another unaddressed injustice. Countless people face similar discrimination daily without the means to demand accountability. The Matthews family's decision to pursue systemic change rather than personal compensation represents the highest form of advocacy, fighting not just for themselves, but for everyone who might face similar treatment. By rejecting silence and refusing to be bought off, they transformed an individual injustice into a catalyst for industry-wide reform. This story also reminds us that real change requires evidence, strategy, and persistence. Marcus Matthews didn't just express outrage. He gathered data, built alliances, and presented irrefutable proof of systematic discrimination that couldn't be dismissed as an isolated incident. Finally, Elijah's resilience demonstrates that while we cannot control how others treat us, we can control how we respond. By maintaining his dignity, excellence, and humanity in the face of dehumanizing treatment, he reclaimed his power and inspired others to recognize and confront injustice. The struggle for equality isn't about isolated incidents, but about transforming systems that perpetuate inequity. True justice isn't achieved through punishment alone, but through creating lasting change that prevents others from suffering similar indignities. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and felt powerless to stop it? Or have you experienced prejudice firsthand and wished you had the resources to fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or opened your eyes to realities others face daily. Please hit the like button and subscribe to support more content that shines a light on these crucial issues. Remember, change begins with awareness, but it only succeeds through action. Thank you for listening, and may we all work toward a world where no one's dignity depends on their wealth, status, or connections.